In spaceflight, burnout is when a rocket reaches maximum velocity and stops firing because it has run out of fuel. As a high achiever, I constantly worked at maximum velocity without suspecting that I could ever run out of fuel. Coming from a small town in France, when I got into Cambridge University, I felt that I had to prove that I belonged there by studying harder and faster no matter what. I even took on the extra challenge of pursuing 2 law degrees, one at Cambridge University, one at Paris Panthéon-Assas, to obtain a double master's in law, which means that in 4 years I studied the equivalent of 7 years' worth of law degrees and in 2 languages. Although I succeeded in these courses, if self-care was a course, that would have been the one I failed. My strategy as a student was simple: study more, sleep less. So very early on, I learned to fight against the natural urge to sleep, and I fueled all my studies with caffeine, painkillers, and chronic stress. I normalized the feeling of being anxious during the day and restless at night as the price to pay for success. I had no idea at the time, but I was burning out. Despite how anxious, how stressed out, I did graduate and I even got my dream job. So I thought, this strategy works. I just have to tough it out again. I became a lawyer, and my strategy, once again, was simple: work faster and harder at all costs. If I didn't work, I felt guilty and worried. So I sacrificed all my passions one by one, even my lifelong love for the arts, which once fueled my creativity. I cancelled all my social plans, eventually deciding it was easier if I stopped making any. I neglected my marriage. After all, my primary relationship was my work. So I ended up divorced. I had a very narrow definition of success at the time, so I developed a strategy in the office. How many more minutes can I work if I do not leave my desk? I ate all my meals, hunched over my computer, and even learned to fight against the natural urge to drink water to save time on a trip to the bathroom. And sleep? How inconvenient is that? Just getting in the way of getting more work done. This strategy worked for a while, until one day it backfired. As I left the office after pulling 2 back-to-back all-nighters, I blacked out at the back of a taxi. After years of chronic stress, insomnia, and anxiety, my mind, my body, gave up. When I opened my eyes again, heading to a completely empty home, I realized with a deep sense of dread that my health, my relationships became the collateral damage to my success. I could not even do that one thing I sacrificed everything else for. I could not work. It turns out, sacrificing your self-care to save time and work more, it's not a productivity hack. It's how you burn out. And burning out felt like my greatest failure at the time, because it is how my career as a lawyer ended. I remember searching for a burnout advisor. I couldn't find one, so I decided to create the profession I needed. I became a professional burnout advisor. Fast forward many years, and I am now the person leading universities and leading organizations school for burnout intervention. And wherever I work, be it the US, Europe, or Asia, my clients tell me the same thing. I didn't know that this feeling had a name. This name is burnout, and it is universal. You're mentally drained. You're physically exhausted and you're struggling to perform. Having helped thousands of high-achieving students and professionals, I have discovered that if you burn out early as a student, there is a very strong likelihood that you're going to burn out again as a professional. And this is because the harmful habits that you develop as a student only get worse as the years go by. How do I know this? I've met the future versions of you. I meet them every day. Successful lawyers, traders, doctors. When I ask one of my successful but burnt out clients, when did you first start to sacrifice self-care in the name of success? He replied with no hesitation, back when I was at university. I started to drink to cope with my stress. I thought it was harmless and fun. But when he became a trader, his stress escalated, so his drinking escalated. You learn to cope with your stress at university with drinking, and before you know it, you've become a burnt-out, high-functioning alcoholic as a professional. Or like me, you learn to cope with your stress at university by operating in a constant sleep deficit. Before you know it, you've become a burnt-out insomniac as a professional. I see this pattern every day. Brilliant, but burnt out. Burnout is the dark side of brilliance. In our pursuit of more and more success, self-care is what we sacrifice first and what we neglect most. And this is exactly how the brightest stars burn out the fastest, because we fuel our success with chronic stress. So let's talk about stress. I have bad news. I know that as a student, you have a lot of stress now. Exams, revision, it's rough, I remember. But it is only going to get worse when you become a professional. I have good news though. Healthy doses of stress are actually good for you. They propel your drive, your motivation, they lift you up. It is only chronic stress that wears you down. It is chronic stress that burns you out. So what if I told you that there is just one thing that you can do every day to combat chronic stress, prevent academic burnout, and get the grades you want? Would you do it? And what if I told you that the same thing could also be done for you to prevent professional burnout and get the career you want? Would you do it? This one thing is to fuel your success with self-care. Whenever stress arises, and it will, it is a signal to fuel with a small dose of self-care. And this is how you can combat chronic stress and prevent burnout. We often do not learn this early on, and we burn out later on. Just like one of the students I work with, she was bright, ambitious, she was enthusiastic about her studies, an avid reader full of dreams. But on her second year of undergrad, her brilliance started to fade and harmful habits started to form. This was her strategy. Glued at her desk with no movement, in horrible back pain, turning to junk food for comfort, and then worrying about weight gain, staying up late at night, watching series to numb her stress away, and then cramming her revisions at the last minute, struggling to keep grades up. Now think about how you fuel your studies. Does this pattern sound familiar? On the morning of her finals, exam anxiety became unbearable. To escape her fear of failure, she would have done anything at all. That morning, she boiled her kettle to make tea, but instead, in a moment of panic and desperation, she deliberately scalded her hand without boiling water. She was rushed to the hospital with a second-degree burn. In her mind, this injury could look like an accident, but admitting she was burnt out felt like it would be a sign of failure, a sign of weakness. This was not a rational thought, but the dread she was experiencing was real. She was only 20 and already experiencing burnout episode number 1. An intervention was needed. Now, when you hear her story, you might think, this sounds really extreme. But what if we consider all the harmful habits that we have every day to cope with our stress? First, what do you neglect when you're stressed? Perhaps you neglect your sleep, you sacrifice your body, you don't exercise. Perhaps you also abandon your hobbies or neglect your relationships. Next, what do you overconsume when you're stressed? Social media, smoking, vaping, drugs, binge drinking, binge eating. Have you ever noticed that when your stress escalates, these harmful habits escalates too? And we've normalized many of these harmful habits as the things we do to cope with our stress and succeed. Her burnout story is not an isolated incident. A 2023 survey published in BMC Medical Education has conducted a survey over 22,000 students and reported that 50% experience academic burnout. And burnout can lead to the darkest thoughts. Another study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine has surveyed over 4,000 medical students and found that not only half of them experience burnout, 10% of them experience suicidal thoughts. The conclusion of the survey is that burnout increases the likelihood of suicidal thoughts. In my experience, burnout intervention for students are too often reactive rather than focused on prevention. I am here for you today to ensure that for you, it never gets this dark. Burnout does not mean that you failed. Burnout does not mean that you're weak. Burnout means that you haven't learned the skill of self-care yet. And it's not a skill we learn in school. Yet it is one of the most fundamental life skills to learn. When I worked with the student who burned her hand, the skill of self-care is what I taught her. She learned that whenever she felt stressed, and she did, it was just a signal to fuel with a little dose of self-care. Small shifts in her habit created a very positive feedback loop. At night, she stopped relying on screens for relaxation and started to read again, feeling inspired and relaxed. She went to bed earlier. She woke up full of energy and she went for walks before starting to study. She didn't need to rely on stress snacking anymore. Her weight, her mood stabilized. Her back pain was gone. After just a few months, she said, "Wow, it's amazing how much better I feel and how much more I can study when I've slept, eaten, and moved well." Small shifts, massive impact. She was back to her brilliant self. When she graduated, she became the lawyer she always wanted to be. And just the other day, she invited me to her office because she said she had something important to show me. I was curious and excited. As I walked into her office, she was proudly holding her Rising Star Award. "Look at what I won," she said. And then she pointed to 2 post-it notes stuck on the award. "Fuel success with self-care." Looking at me, smiling, she said, "And that is how I want it." Those 2 post-it notes became her reminder to combat chronic stress and prevent burning out again with small doses of self-care. Seeing her become the rising star, a brilliant and healthy professional, is evidence that learning self-care really matters. Small doses of self-care is also how I recovered from my burnout. I run in the morning, I take proper breaks to eat my meals, I meditate at night, and on my days off, I pursue my passion for art with my loved ones. I've achieved more success, greater work, and I've never burnt out again. Small shifts, massive impact. As it turns out, self-care is a much more sustainable fuel to rely on than chronic stress. So over to you now. Which fuel are you going to choose? Let's fast forward into your future. I want you to imagine that you got your dream job. You know, the one that you're studying so hard for now. It's 10 years from now, and imagine you have a choice. On the one hand, you can continue to do everything you're doing now. You can continue to fuel your success with chronic stress. You neglect your body, you sacrifice your relationships, you abandon all your hobbies, you rely on coffee and sugar for energy, alcohol for relaxation, constant scrolling to escape. You're in pain, you're lonely, and you resent work for it. You've burnt out. I ask you, is that what you imagine success to be? There is a much brighter future, one where you fuel your success with self-care. You energize with nutritious meals and movement. You also relax with music, playing sports, spending time in nature. You're motivated, and you have loved ones to celebrate your success with. Which one do you choose? Which future do you want? I honestly did not realize that I had this choice back when I was a student. Now, you do. The time to prioritize your self-care is not tomorrow, when you graduate, or when you start your career. It starts today. So aim high. Become the brightest star. Just remember, like a rocket needs fuel to keep firing and avoid burning out, so do you. Self-care is the fuel to your academic and professional success. Thank you.